We left Doylestown and headed in the Fairmont area of Philadelphia.
Philadelphia, 2003. With its moving masses and chaotic rhythms, this city is like any other. But down one street in a quiet part of town, a startling sight takes you back in time. This menacing, medieval-style fortress has intimidated residents for nearly 200 years. When it was opened in 1829, it was the largest building in the United States. Its forbidding towers once served as a warning to anyone in the surrounding town who might consider committing a crime. This is the Eastern State Penitentiary.
In the center is the rotunda where guards kept a close watch on the surrounding cell blocks. Here, prominently displayed on the wall, is a plaque. The plaque's inscription proudly states, "To the everlasting honor of those inmates of the Eastern State Penitentiary of Pennsylvania who served in the Army and Navy during the World War." Underneath, it lists 121 prisoners' numbers. Was the challenge of defeating Germany and bringing peace to Western Europe during World War I placed in the hands of a bunch of murderers and robbers? A woman here in Philadelphia wants to know.
Elizabeth McKenty is the great-granddaughter of Bob McKenty, the warden of Eastern State Penitentiary during World War I.
I first heard about the prison because my great-grandfather was the warden here, which the family made clear was a really big deal, but it was only when I moved to Philadelphia as an adult and I saw the prison for the first time that I went, whoa, it's just an amazing facade to see. It's not something you expect in the urban landscape at all. But the thing that I found truly unusual was the plaque.
I'm Wes Cowan, and I've come to Philadelphia with Tukufu Zuberi to decipher the mystery within these prison walls. Elizabeth, this is really a unique plaque. What do you know about it?
I heard about it from my father's cousin. She had told me that she'd come to the unveiling when she was a child. Her grandfather, my great-grandfather, was the warden at the time. I wasn't aware that it was going to be a memorial to the inmates who had served during the World War.
So what do you want to know?
I would like to know how this came about, that these inmates served during the World War, and also I'd like to know what my great-grandfather's role was.
And it's kind of unusual because by the time the United States entered the war in 1917, Wilson was touting this as the war to make the world safe for democracy. Are these the kind of guys that he would want to have serving in our armed forces? I mean, these guys are convicts. I think that there's a lot to learn about this plaque.
While Wes heads off to New York to see if prisoners were allowed to fight in World War I, I'm going to see what I can find out here. Since it was shut down in 1971, the prison has been turned into a museum. I've heard there was a film that was shot in the prison in 1929. Was the plaque here then? I'm meeting with Sean Kelly, the program director, to take a look.
So I have basic shots here, inmates coming out of the vans.
These are some great images.
Aren't they fantastic? And then this is the shot here we're looking for. And so they have this great, nice, slow pan shot. And then if you look right there next to the doorway, there it is.
That's it. Wow.
Right there on the wall.
Now, why would the plaque be in the center of the prison?
Well, you know, it's anybody's guess, but in the 20s, the inmates would be walking through that room all the time. And so it was a nice, visible spot. It was the most trafficked spot in the whole prison. A good place to make a statement about something you thought was important for the institution.
Whatever point was being made by displaying the plaque in such a prominent place, I still don't understand how a group of prisoners were being sent to war. By the spring of 1917, the First World War had been raging in Europe for almost 3 years. The United States was finally drawn into the conflict on April 6, 1917, when President Wilson declared war on Germany.
To find out more about how the military recruited soldiers during World War I, I've come to New York to meet with historian and author Thomas Fleming.
We started from zero when we declared war. We had been talking about being neutral for 32 months before this, and we weren't ready for war. So we had to find men to man a huge industrial war machine, and we also had to find men to put in the army to fight.
So how did Wilson ultimately solve this dilemma?
He decided to go for a draft, for conscription, and Congress passed a Selective Service Act.
The Selective Service Act required every man between the age of 21 and 30 to register for the draft. These men were then placed into 5 classes according to who was most needed for the war effort at home and who was needed on the battlefield. Single men and unskilled laborers were placed in Class 1 and were the first to be drafted. Prisoners and ex-convicts were deemed morally unfit for duty and placed in the 5th and last class. As
the war progressed, the pressure to get men into the Army built and built and built because the Germans now became apparent, had a superiority, a numerical superiority on the Western Front, and were in a position to win the war. So Wilson's first statement that he needed 1 million men was now changed to 2 million, and then 3 million. And before the war was over, they were planning for an army of 5 million men.
So there's tremendous pressure at the Class 1 level. What happens when you run out of those Class 1 people?
They started taking people from the other classes and moving them into Class 1.
So as the war ground on, there must have been a temptation to bring people up from Class 5 that could include convicts.
That's quite possible. No question about it.
So the demand for able-bodied men was so great that prisoners might have been sent to war. But did any of the guys on our plaque fight?
I'm headed to the Pennsylvania State Archives where the penitentiary records are stored. I'm meeting with historian Bob Wintermute. He spent years researching U.S. military history during World War I, including the story behind the plaque. He should have some information on our prisoners.
These are the ledger books that should contain all the information that we're looking for. Who do you want to start with?
Let's start with B1739.
B1739.
Yes.
William, alias Tom Gooderman, murder in the 2nd degree.
Whoa, okay.
Maximum sentence was 19 years and 7 months. B6158, Walter Rudisil, 18, pandering. He was a pimp.
He was a pimp.
Let's see what they say about it. He enticed Hazel M. Stewart and Annie Rudisil, a minor female, probably a sister, to become inmates of a house of prostitution.
These were some pretty hardcore criminals.
Yeah, if they're in Eastern State Penitentiary, they're felons.
Do we know how they looked?
Here's some of our mug shots. Found one of our guys, Walter Rudisil.
Mr. Pimp. So we got a face with our name.
Now I've got a good sense of who these men were, but finding out if they actually served may not be so simple. According to Bob, in 1973, most of the World War I military records that I hoped to find were destroyed in a fire, but there might be another way. During the Depression, many veterans rushed to apply for bonus money that was due to them. The Pennsylvania applications are housed here at the archives. Maybe our prisoners are among the applicants.
Gooderman, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a murderer. This is a list of his decorations and citations.
He got the Silver Star.
He got the Silver Star. In October 20th, 1918, he was severely wounded.
So this tells us that some of these guys, at least, served in combat and were distinguished by their military performance. Is there any way that we can show whether they were imprisoned or prisoners at this time?
You know, a good place to take a look would be the warden's letterpress books. Okay, here we go. This is from the deputy warden to an attorney representing somebody who's inquiring about whether he can be sent into the military or not, a former inmate. We notified them that if they could get into the service, we had no objection whatever. We have at the present time close to 100 men in domestic and foreign service. Well, we've got 121 in the plaque. We do not require them to fill out any reports, but we would like to hear from them by letter at least once a month if they have an opportunity to do so. This tells us that these guys are all parolees.
So the guys listed on the plaque did fight for their country in World War I, but they weren't prisoners. They were all ex-cons on parole. But even ex-cons were still included in Class 5 and considered morally unfit for duty. Then Bob finds another letter in the warden's press book.
Yeah, this is it right now. Dated November 8th, 1918. It's to a former inmate who is apparently in training or shortly to go to Europe. We fully believe that we will be able to secure pardons for all the men that served their country in this time of war.
Whoa.
That is my reason for requesting you to get in communication with me as soon as you return.
So Warden McKenty, Elizabeth's great-grandfather, knew what was going on. Not only that, but he's also saying that the ex-cons that complete their service should be pardoned. Was he behind the whole thing all along?
I've come to Temple University's urban archives to look through back copies of the Philadelphia Bulletin. I want to find out if there's any mention of the prison or the warden himself during this period. Oh, here's a great headline. Listen to this. 300 Eastern Penn honor prisoners are war heroes. This article quotes Warden Bob directly. When a man asked to be given an opportunity to enlist, we took his word for it. Every man we paroled in this manner gave a good account of himself. One of my burglars came back some time ago all shot up. He had 15 wounds and his right kidney was shot away, and he walked on crutches. He also wore a bunch of medals. He said to me, "Life's a funny thing after all, ain't it, Warden? Here I go and get 15 years in jail for accidentally shoving a man up a railroad track. And then I get all these medals and decorations for killing 24 men. I agreed with him that we were living in a make-believe world." Boy, that's the irony of this whole story, isn't it? So McKenty made it possible for some of his boys to serve their parole in the armed forces. But why did he risk his reputation for a bunch of ex-cons? I think I need to find out more about the kind of man Bob McKenty was. This is Elizabeth's uncle, Reuben McKenty, and his son, Bill.
Here's a family photo of the whole family together. This is my grandfather, Robert J. McKenty. This is my dad. This is my mother. She's holding my brother, Bill, who is the father of Elizabeth.
And they're posed before the prison wall.
The whole family, my father and his 4 brothers and sister, grew up in the prison. And it was their home. When my dad and mother got married, they each chipped in each prisoner. I don't know the exact amount, but they bought them a full set of china.
The prisoners bought
Yes.
the wedding china?
Yeah, we still have it.
Oh, you're kidding me. Oh, that's great. It's clear that the family had a unique relationship with the prisoners. But I'd like to understand more about what McKenty was like as warden. Bill showed me an article describing his philosophy. He persuaded himself that if the convicts were treated with consideration and fully trusted, they would respond with loyalty, that by these methods they would be reclaimed from their evil ways and returned to society as honest, useful citizens. Huh. Interesting. I mean, you know, we would say today in modern jargon that they were rehabilitated. That's great. You know, I keep looking at these pictures down here, and they look to me like World War I era soldiers. What do you guys know about these?
These pictures were always referred to as the warden's boys that were inmates were sent off to World War I.
Well, you know, I look at these faces and I can't help but wonder if they somehow connect with the numbers that are on the plaque. Bob McKenty had an unusual relationship with his prisoners. His devotion resonated through the long hallways of the prison cell blocks. He truly believed that if given the opportunity, they could return to society as decent citizens. This plaque leaves us with evidence of his commitment to these men. I think it's time to give Elizabeth some answers.
First of all, we found out that the men listed on this plaque went to war, but not as prisoners. At the time they fought, we believe that they were all parolees.
But you know, theoretically, they still were not allowed to actually fight in World War I.
So there is still something curious here.
We know that your great-grandfather did all that he could to give these men the opportunity to fight in the U.S. military.
Wow.
He saw this as the ultimate opportunity for their future.
In fact, he even pursued having many of them pardoned once they returned from the war.
Oh.
And we believe that he placed this plaque here not only to honor the men who served in the military, but also as an inspiration for those who were still imprisoned.
You know, we also wanted to leave you with a little reward for letting us work on the project.
So we have a plaque for you.
Oh, well, how about that? In the everlasting memory of Robert J. McKenty, Warden of Eastern State Penitentiary, 1909 to 1923. I think that would please him and my cousin and the rest of the family very, very much. Thank you.
While only one of these men died, each one of them risked his life on behalf of his country. Once murderers and thieves, one man's determination gave them a second chance. Through Bob McKenty's dedication, the memory of their efforts lingers on.
How has the U.S. military filled its ranks? Well, over the years, the methods have changed. To build his army to defeat the British, George Washington offered cash bonuses and free Western land. When the new recruits proved to be inefficient, Washington called in the local militia to save the day. Once the war ended, Washington actually proposed legislation for a more efficient recruitment process, but Congress turned him down. Congress ultimately changed its mind in March of 1863 during the Civil War. They gave President Lincoln the power to require all healthy men between the ages of 20 and 45 to register for a national draft. Not everyone agreed with President Lincoln's newfound powers. During a 4-day period we now call the draft riots in New York City, nearly 1,000 people were killed. During World War I, the war to end all wars, the government actually adopted a policy of don't call us, we'll call you. The Wilson administration wanted complete control over who was vital to the wartime economy and who was expendable on the front. Just prior to World War II, the first ever peacetime draft was instituted. By Pearl Harbor, the government was prepared to send boys as young as 18 off to die for their country. Prior to the Vietnam War, one's eligibility for the draft was based on your age. But faced with widespread protests, in 1969, President Richard Nixon instituted the random selection lottery system. Today, we've got an all-volunteer army. But when you turn 18, you still have to register for the draft. And remember, up until your 26th birthday, Uncle Sam may still want you. To find out more, check out History Detectives on the web at pbs.org.